joining us today. I had a quote here that I wanted to get to. Let me get back to it here. I think I passed it, but I just wanted to get your thoughts on this quote. This is a quote that we found in, let me see where this is at. This is the currentnewsmagazine.net. And as you can see, it says the global medical outsourcing market is projected to register a compound annual growth rate of about 10% during the forecast period 2018 to 2023. So here we are in 2019, we're still growing. Why is there such a huge growth, do you think, in outsourcing amongst doctors?
It is because it's needed, Patrick. For the people on the line, you may or may not be aware that doctors are pretty smart people who are not so smart with their money. So you know much more about business and how to grow money than most doctors do. In fact, like half of doctors are behind in retirement planning. 40% of doctors reported burnout last year. And the problem that they're facing, especially the doctors in private practice, is that they're working hard, they're seeing patients, but it's getting more and more difficult for them to translate that clinical activity into money in the bank. In fact, when burned out doctors were asked, what would you need to turn around this burnout? What they say is make more money. So doctors need more money for today. They need more money for retirement. And the best way to have that happen is to collect what they're actually owed. And the best way to do that is to outsource your medical billing.
Hey, that's a great summary of what we're talking about today. Folks, if you're interested in helping those doctors, then you need to get back with your business coach here at ABS and tell us that you want to be in our training that's coming up, or one of them. We do about 6 or 7 of these a year. By the way, here's another quote that I think fits right in with what you just said, Dr. Vicki. 2 out of 3 doctors say they are just squeaking by or in the red financially. That's shocking to me.
It is to me too, Patrick. But I will tell you, as somebody who's run my own private practice, I understand how and why it happens. And I think it has to do with this poor financial literacy. Like never in residency or medical school are we taught basic business skills. You know, how to market, you know, how to run profitable businesses. And in fact, I know doctors who've actually gone bankrupt. And, you know, doctors get into trouble in their practices for all sorts of different reasons. But it doesn't matter what the reason is, the prescription is getting back to basics, getting paid what you're owed. As you say, plugging these cash flow leaks. And quite often, if you bring in an outsider, you're able to see this a lot more efficiently. So sometimes I think of licensees as sort of the turnaround doctor. They're the people that can come in, take a doctor who's really worried, wondering, am I going to be able to make it, or taking somebody in the red and putting them in the black quickly without having to see, 100 more patients a week. So this is a very palatable prescription. You don't have to do anything more, doctor. You don't have to work any harder. You just need to work smarter here.
Yeah, and you had a pretty bad experience yourself, I think, when you first started your practice, didn't you? You were in partnership with some other doctor, right?
Oh, so you want to hear my story, huh? I'm happy to share it. So I actually call myself an accidental surgeon. I was in a graduate program when I had my own surgical emergency. I was bleeding internally. And by the time the doctors got into my belly, about half of my blood volume was in my pelvis. So I thought this was the end. And I was so grateful to wake up in the recovery room. I knew I wanted to be a doctor, save other people's lives like my own had been saved. And not surprisingly, I became a surgeon. Well, I did have this wave of insight that, maybe I shouldn't just go out and hang up a shingle right after I completed my training. So I joined another doctor who was in solo private practice. And, he was at the end, nearing the end of his career, and he wanted to work less. He wanted to share call. And so I came in. Now, he had basically done everything in-house. He had this person who did the booking, the billing. As she describes it, she did everything except the operating. And not too long after I came, she handed in her resignation. And boy, that was sure a shock. Well, my partner's wife had this brilliant idea, how hard can billing be? So she decided to take some time from her tennis game and come in and do our billing for us. And then we were looking for another person to do the front office work. Well, it didn't take this woman too long before she figured out this was a lot more complicated than she ever imagined. And as we were working to do things, instead of taking money out of the practice, I wound up making an owner investment to pay quarterly taxes. So it was definitely going in the wrong direction.
But
We hired.
you took out a loan. Is that what you're saying?
No. Well, sort of. I mean, I had to go into my checking account and take money out of my checking account and put it into the practice.
Yeah, to cover the costs. Wow.
To pay our quarterly taxes. And that was not how that was supposed to work. I mean, I should be taking money out of the practice, not having to put money into the practice.
Right.
So anyway, we had hired this temp, and man, we thought she was great. She used to go out to the waiting room and help the little old ladies complete their registration. And finally, he hired the people that he wanted. Shortly thereafter, we got a call from the temp agency who had sent us over the temp, and they said, we're very sorry to inform you that temp that we sent over to your office, we found out that she's a convicted felon. She had committed Medicare fraud.
Oh my
And
goodness.
they said, now you want to take a careful look at your billing, and if there's any irregularities, just know that she could be responsible. But by that time, billing was like a complete disaster. I mean, I don't know how we would tell if we had any billing irregularities. So
Right.
what a complete nightmare. And when the money is not coming in, when you're worried about money, there's always a slice of your attention pie that's devoted to that. Like they say you shouldn't drive and text because it's distracted driving. Well, any doctor who's worried about money engages in distracted doctoring. And that was definitely me. I was like always worried about money. Around that time, I had an opportunity to join this multidisciplinary team of doctors who were treating breast cancer. And so I left this surgeon's office and set out on my own. And the very first decision that I made was I was going to outsource my billing. Like I didn't do my own taxes. I knew billing was complicated, and I wanted my billing in the hands of somebody who was expert at it. I didn't want it in-house because what happens if the person who does my billing quits? Or what if they're not very good at their job? I absolutely needed financial security, and I thought that the best way to achieve that was to outsource my billing. And it turns out that that's probably the single best decision I made because I had a great person who really understood business, and she helped me grow my practice in a very strategic way. Like she would come in and show me the reports about, okay, here are the diagnostic and procedure codes that, are generating most of the revenue for you. Then I could decide what kinds of patients I really wanted to see. And I grew my practice by design. I knew, where I got the big emotional rewards and where I got the greatest financial rewards. And I could really focus on taking care of patients instead of worrying, am I going to be able to meet my payroll?
Yeah, you mentioned something just now that the one thing that helped you the most, your wisest decision there was to outsource your own billing. That reminds me of a book that's out on the market. Maybe you've heard of this one. It's called 10 Critical Questions for Physicians in Private Practice.
Oh yeah, that rings a bell, Patrick.
This is Dr. Ragner's latest book, by the way, and you'll notice that the subtitle is "And the Single Choice That Can Help Your Practice to Prosper and Grow." And of course, she's referring to outsourcing their billing. So, folks, this is, by the way, a marketing tool that we've designed specifically for you. If you get involved with our business, you'll be able to use this book. It's a physically printed, paperback book. And by the way, on the back of it there, we've left room for your name and contact information. So you see that you're basically going to be right there on the back cover along with Dr. Vicki's little blurb there about her. So it's a wonderful marketing tool. Dr. Vicki, you've got some great questions that you ask in this book to doctors that they need to be paying attention to. I thought we'd just kind of cover some of those real quickly so that you can tell people why you wrote this book.
All right. Well, there are an awful lot of doctors out there who are struggling. And I thought about, what do doctors really need to focus on? And as I did this, what I realized is that I had just compiled a whole list of reasons that doctors should outsource their billing. So, most doctors want to know how to grow effectively, how to get the kinds of personal and professional and financial rewards that attracted them to a career in medicine. But this is also a great marketing tool for licensees because basically this is a doctor giving other doctors like 10 reasons that they should outsource their billing.
Yeah, it starts with what you just talked about, getting the first question is doctors should use the right person to get the job done. Now, in the book, of course, she words this as questions to the doctor, but we thought today we'd just turn them into statements here so you could address this, doctor. Why is it that doctors feel like they can hire, their spouse or their niece or somebody that they know to do the billing when they haven't had any training in it, probably?
Well, I think at first when doctors get started, they think just like my former partner's wife. How hard can this be? You put a bunch of numbers on a piece of paper and send it in and voila, you're a millionaire.
Right, yeah.
But it doesn't take very long to figure out that is not the case. And, Patrick, I always scratch my head because, there are very few doctors who do their own taxes, right? Because taxes are complex.
Yeah.
And why is it that doctors don't recognize, first of all, the importance of maintaining regular revenue and why they do not put this in the hands of the experts? And I think the answer is doctors are kind of control freaks, and they get the sense that they're in control if they keep it in-house. But the truth is that I think personally that the best way to be in control is to put the job in the hands of the expert. So if a doctor really wants to do well in practice, I think it's important that they understand what they do best, what they really enjoy doing, and they outsource the rest.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to, I'm going to stop this slide here. I'm going to put the second question on the screen here so we can address it if I can find it here. I got lost. Okay, here it is. The second question we turned into this statement. Doctors need to create checks and balances to prevent fraud and theft. Now, you already gave a good reason why they should be outsourcing because you have that person who had committed Medicare fraud. That's just hard for me to wrap my brain around that somebody would attempt something like that, but obviously there's a lot of that stuff going on out there.
There is. So I contribute to the Journal of Medical Practice Management, and the editor once told me that the one kind of article they always have to have is something about theft and fraud in every single issue because it's so huge with doctors. In fact, if you look at all industries, medical practices are the primary victims of theft and fraud. And, you know, I remember watching the Dr. Phil show once, and he was talking about how when he was in private practice as a psychologist, he had this funny feeling about the person who was doing his billing, and sure enough, she was embezzling from him. So doctors tend to be very trusting, and they dismiss that small, still voice that says, gee, I wonder about this person. And, you know, I have a friend who got her entire retirement embezzled by her trusted office manager of 20 years. So this is a worry all doctors have. You sort of wondering, okay, whom can I trust? And what's the best way to protect yourself? Well, it's by putting in checks and balances. So, you know, the same person sending out the bills is not the same person opening up the mail and making deposits. And, you know, creative people can figure out all sorts of creative ways of taking doctors' hard-earned dollars. So outsourcing is a really great way of protecting doctors.
All right, so let me pause here just to say this, folks. If you're listening carefully to what Dr. Ratner is telling you, this is from a doctor now who's been there and done that and obviously has the t-shirt. She's telling you that there is a huge need out there for doctors to turn their billing over to somebody like yourself, somebody that's been trained and certified like we do for you while you come down here to Dallas and go through our training class, and somebody who's been a part of a nationwide network. You see, we're the largest network of independent medical billing companies anywhere in the United States. So we've got the resources, and you have the backing of a huge organization. So it's not like you're just getting out there and starting on your own. All right, let's go to number 3 here. Doctors need to minimize their risk of medical malpractice lawsuits and payer audits. Is there really that big a problem?
Oh, yes, there is. So, you know, you talk with doctors about what keeps them up at night, and medical litigation is, you know, towards the top of the list, followed shortly by payer audits. So, you know, I was an expert in medical malpractice lawsuits. I saw about 100 cases, and I've talked with people about it. And you know, one time a lawyer with whom I'm working asked the question, you know, why does somebody pick up a phone and call a lawyer for a bad medical outcome while others don't? Because there's plenty of patients who have bad outcomes who don't sue their doctors.
Yeah.
And he said, you know, quite often it's that the patient is angry about something, and quite often they're angry about a billing issue.
Wow.
So, you know, in doctors' busy practices, patient care comes first. And if the billing is in-house, you know, quite often that call about the medical bill, you know, it might be ignored for a day or two. You know, patients don't feel like they're being heard and responded to. And those patients can sue. So doctors understand that if they have happy patients, they're going to decrease their risk of lawsuit. And I know it sounds basic. You know, you need to talk with patients about their bill. And when I work with doctors, I also advise them to, you know, write off charges for patients who are not happy. Just put yourself in the patient's shoes and imagine how you would like to be treated. Because, boy, the personal and economic cost of a lawsuit is absolutely huge. So that's medical malpractice. But there's another thing that doctors really worry about, which is a payer audit. So it wasn't too long ago that Medicare disclosed what they're paying all doctors. Before the Affordable Care Act, that was private information. So nobody knew how much Medicare was paying Dr. Brown and Dr. Green and Dr. Jones. But after this data became available under the Freedom of Information Act, some people started noticing some things, that about 80% of the payments were going to about 20% of the doctors. And the explanation was that there were doctors engaged in hanky-panky. And so, I mean, this is really, really hard to believe. But there are kind of like these Medicare bounty hunters out there. If somebody can find a doctor engaging in Medicare fraud, and very few doctors, by the way, are, these bounty hunters get a percentage of the revenue that's recovered.
Yeah.
So there are people out there who are not doctors, they're not Medicare employees, they're people looking for a quick buck who are going through all of these records. And, you know, once they raise a red flag about a doctor, that doctor gets investigated, whether or not that doctor deserves it. And, you know, in the U.S. Court, you're innocent until proven guilty. Well, with a payer audit, you are assumed guilty before proven innocent. So how can doctors protect themselves? Well, the best way is to sort of, you know, be part of the herd, right? They're not billing too much for any single procedure code. They're not billing outliers. Okay, well, how do you know somebody's a billing outlier? You know what the curve looks like because you know what other doctors in the community are charging. So, you know, outsourcing billing helps you be in the middle, be with the herd so that you're not a target for audit. Now, the complete triggers for audits are, of course, secret. Nobody wants to talk about it. But I think that having, you know, a biller who knows what's going on in the community, I think is probably the best protection from payer audits.
Yeah, because they're local, like you said, they know what's going on, and that's why our licensees are so successful, I think, is because the doctors like dealing with somebody that's right here, not some national company and there's an 800 number and you get a different person every time you call, or God forbid they're somewhere overseas and, you know, can't communicate with the doctor. They want somebody that is the owner of that billing company, so that if something goes wrong, they can call them up and say, "Come to my office. Let's figure this out." By the way, one of the things that we offer through our licensees is this service here that's shown on the screen. It's called Audit Guard, and you can find out more about this on our website. But basically, it helps with those audits to guard against the doctor being taken by surprise. And there's all kinds of benefits to that. Oh, hey, by the way, I just wanted to tell you, Dr. Vicki, there's a comment here by Walter. He says, "Good stuff." That's short and sweet, isn't it?
Walter, I'm glad you recognize the value, because this kind of information that you're getting on this webinar and other webinars hosted by ABS is going to give you the competitive advantage. I mean, this is not something that you can just go out and find on your own. There's no doctors out there talking about these things. So thank you for recognizing the value.
Yeah. Let's see, Dr. Vicki, if you don't mind, I'm going to just skip some of the questions here. These folks, of course, can get a copy of this book electronically from their business coach here at ABS to see the whole thing. But one of the things you mentioned earlier, I want to put here on the screen, this is question number 5, has to do with burnout. Doctors need to find a way to prevent or treat burnout. Talk to us about that, and why is that happening?
Great question, Patrick. There's a lot of different people who have different answers. But think about this. About 40% of doctors in 2018 experienced toxic stress, experienced burnout. Now, I don't know if you've ever experienced burnout, but burnout is toxic to the brain. It impairs performance. And it's kind of scary to think about a doctor not wanting to be there seeing patients like you. I mean, it doesn't serve anybody. Okay, so why are doctors burned out? Well, when they're interviewed, they said things like, we feel like we're just cogs in a big wheel. We're frustrated with electronic medical records. We're frustrated with all of these administrative tasks. We're not getting paid enough. We are working way too many hours. And, you know, almost every single thing that they list on their reasons for burnout, the remedy is outsourcing medical billing, because what happens is when they outsource their billing, these administrative problems are outsourced too. So there's somebody else doing the things that they really, really don't like to do so that they can focus their time and effort on things that they do enjoy. And, I've seen any number of doctors who have completely turned things around by making relatively small changes. And I read this great book called The One Thing. And the idea of the book is, if you want to make a transformation, there are a whole bunch of things that you can do, but you want to focus on that one single thing that's going to make the biggest impact. It's going to kind of be the keystone. And as I thought about it, the keystone for practice transformation really is outsourcing billing.
Yeah, it is. In fact, I think by getting that out of the office and not having to worry about that aspect of their practice, that doctors can then focus on what they really love to do, which is, of course, taking care of patients.
Absolutely.
There's a question here I want to address because I'm not sure where it came from, but Joshua asks, is this network marketing? Joshua, I when I was younger, I went to a lot of network marketing meetings with all the rah-rah, and you get some people under you and they get people under them, and somehow you make $1 million a day. No, this is a real business, Josh. This is not something that's a scam or a fly-by-night. It's been around for, well, at least 20 years. My wife and I did billing for doctors back in the late 80s and early 90s. So I can tell you that it's a very solid business. I think Dr. Vicki probably knew some other doctors that had outsourced. About half of them, I think, right now are doing their billing themselves, and the other half are outsourcing. That's about the figures that we get. So does that sound about right to you, Dr. Vicki?
It does. It does. And I'll tell you why I am so passionate and enthusiastic about it. So I'm a coach for those doctors who are struggling, right? They come to me because they're unhappy. And I like creating happy people. So, I tell doctors, big things that they can do to make a difference. And for the doctors in private practice, outsourcing their billing is one of them. Now that we've got changes in the tax law, I'm also really encouraging doctors to see a tax strategist, because quite often they can use the tax code to decrease their tax burden by a lot of money. But, I'm excited about the things that make a big impact. I know this makes a big impact. I'm not an employee of ABS. I don't make any sort of commission. That's not my incentive. My incentive is helping doctors create the lives that they want. And I'm just really passionate that this is one of the major interventions to get there.
Thank you. One of the questions in your book has to do with staffing. How that some doctors don't know that they need to have the correct staffing. I thought I wanted to address that by showing this chart here, Dr. Vicki. I know you're calling in right now, but I'm showing that chart that I've shown you on the differences between in-house cost for billing and the doctor in-house versus outsourcing. And anyway, folks, you can get a copy of this webinar slides in the handout section. Let me see if I've actually put that in there. I probably haven't yet, but I'll put that in there in the handout section when we wrap this up, and you'll have a copy of this. Basically, a doctor can save a lot of money. Have you found that to be true, Dr. Vicki? Was it true in your case, for example? You never try to do it yourself, but other doctors who spend a lot of money, don't they, on overhead, benefits, errors and omissions insurance, training costs, all kinds of stuff involved in running your own billing practice, isn't it?
Right. Well, all I can tell you is that my bank account grew more quickly when I outsourced my billing than when billing was in-house. So I can tell you that for myself. But here is something that chart does not include. All right. So insurance companies want to hang on to their money because that money can make money. So they actually will reject claims as a financial strategy, right? As a strategy to be more profitable. And what's not captured in this slide is the cost of not following up on those rejected claims, because I know an awful lot of doctors who are just really busy taking care of patients, and the rejected claims fall to the bottom of the to-do list, like nobody gets to it. And so there are doctors who are leaving 25, 27% of their revenue on the exam table. Like, can you imagine any business saying, oh, yeah, I'm happy collecting 70% of what I'm owed? I mean, I'd love for Nordstrom's to say that with my shoe bills, but they don't. They seem to want to collect 100%. And the cost of leaving this money on the exam table, it is huge. And so the bottom line, doctors want to have more money in their checking account. And, outsourcing their billing is much easier than seeing a whole bunch of new patients or, trying to do something fancy. If you just get paid for what you're owed, it's the fastest and most effective way of increasing your revenue and your profitability.
Here's a comment from Maduri. He says, wow, kudos to Dr. Ratner for your time and your insights today. So,
oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, by the way, there's also a comment here, or question really by Scott. I think what he's asking about is the doctors that are, going to work for hospitals and big groups and things like that. He says the area he's in, that out of all the cardiology practices, only 4 are private. Can you address that a little bit, Dr. Vicki? Why are doctors going to work for hospitals, and do they like it?
So, great question. And I think that the answer is that doctors, well, first of all, most boomer doctors like myself, we did not work as hard as we worked in order to be somebody else's employee. Like, we wanted to be our own bosses, and we want to run our own practices. I mean, there were a couple of people who knew that they wanted to work for hospitals and clinics. But when I was going through my training, about 80% of doctors wanted to be in private practice. The problem is that we don't really have the skills and tools to manage the business side of medicine. And so there are a lot of doctors out there struggling. And then the hospitals and clinics come to them and say, hey, wouldn't you like a guaranteed salary? Wouldn't you like guaranteed regular hours? Sell your practice to us. Let us take care of it. And, for some doctors, that is, something that works. But I will tell you that my colleagues who have done that, who have sold their practices, their biggest question is, how can I retire 5 or 10 years earlier because I am so unhappy? They sort of feel like they've lost their voice. And let me give you just a specific example to illustrate this point. So I was the health and wellness expert for a chain of drugstores, and they were wonderful. It was Bartell Drugs out in Washington State. So, I would go to them with ideas, and they would say yes. And I said, why don't I go out and interview the doctors who were experts in diabetes or sleep medicine or menopause and interview them? So they thought it was a great idea. So I went to one of my buddies who's very articulate, who does sleep medicine. He said to me, Vicki, I just sold my practice. Like, let me check with the marketing department, and I'll let you know whether or not I could be interviewed. Now, if you were a doctor and you had the chance to reach, basically a whole community of patients who were listening because they had exactly the problems that you offered, I mean, that would be a no-brainer, right? You would jump at the chance to be interviewed. But he came back to me and said that the marketing department had told him that if he were interviewed, the marketing people would have to be there just to make sure that everything was said right, and that was, too much of an investment in resources. So he had to say no to this, which is absolutely crazy. I mean, it's a crazy business move, but it's also, just crazy thinking. This doctor had literally lost his voice when he sold his practice. Doctors do not like this.
Yeah.
And so are doctors selling out? Yes, if they're absolutely painted in the corner and they can't see any way out. But I promise you that if the doctor knew that if there were a way of managing the practice and being profitable, these doctors would want to remain independent.
Yeah, that reminds me of another quote from another famous book that's out there by Dr. Ragnar. One of your latest is The Myth of the Rich Doctor. And I got the quote out of the book right here on the screen. Let me read it to people first, and then I want you to comment on this. Physicians in private practice walk away from an average of 30% of their incomes. Now, think about that, folks. When they do not follow up on those rejected insurance claims that Dr. Vicki mentioned earlier. Outsourcing your medical billing could bring claim rejection rates to as low as 2 to 5%. Our nationwide average in our system is less than 2%. And anyway, she says, this may be the fastest and easiest way to increase your cash flow. Now, those are the kinds of things that doctors, they really haven't thought about that, have they?
They really haven't. And, smart doctors, well, they can make not so smart choices. Like, Patrick, I think you were talking about the doctor who went to the bank to take out a line of credit to make sure that he was able to meet payroll, when in fact his claim rejection rate was huge. I mean, a much more effective strategy for solving this problem is to collect what he's owed. And this is sort of a no-brainer business kind of choice. But I doubt this doctor had even thought about that.
I guess so. I'm surprised by those things when I hear them too. Here's another quote from a Medical Economics magazine. Look at this, folks. If you operate a medical practice, it says, that's the headline, you should be outsourcing. Then in the article, it says almost 80% of survey participants felt positive about outsourcing for the medical practice. It not only frees up your employees' time to work on the tasks they were hired for, but it also unkinks your cash flow. In business, it's all about cash flow, isn't it, Vicki? I can solve just about any problem as a CEO if I've got enough cash flow. And sometimes doctors don't have enough.
Yeah. I will tell you that, when I had to make that owner investment to cover my quarterly taxes, it hurt.
Yeah. Here's another one of the questions in your book that we've been going through here. This one says, doctors, oops, I went backwards there. Sorry, let me go back. Here we go. I'll get to it here. Here we go. It's number 7, I think. Yeah, doctors need to protect the privacy of the patients and themselves, and that helps them to avoid HIPAA violations. I think everybody who goes to the doctor hates signing that. Every time they go, they sign some kind of HIPAA release thing, that says, yes, I've been told about HIPAA. And I don't think people realize how doctors can get in trouble, and it can cost them a lot of money if they violate HIPAA.
Oh, yes. So there is this story of an office manager who went on vacation to Hawaii. She took her laptop and it was stolen, which is always a bummer. But the complete bummer was that she had unsecured medical records on this computer because she was going to follow up on patients who were going to be enrolled in a research study. And there is a $250,000 fine to doctors for every unsecured medical record. So wow. This is a big ouch. This is something that doctors are worried about. All sorts of parts of this, cybersecurity, how not to get hacked, and how to make sure that if somebody finds their way into the office computer system, that they are not able to access patient records. The best way to protect patient records is to have it in the cloud. And, that just isn't a common practice among physicians. It's going to be, I think. More and more are becoming more sophisticated about this. But, I read stories all the time about ways that doctors and even clinics and large healthcare organizations have a hard time maintaining privacy. There was just recently an episode where apparently a hospital had purged physical patient files. And of course, these files should be shredded, right? But some rogue scholar just put a bunch of them in the dumpster, and somebody went dumpster diving, and there were thousands of patients whose information, their birth date, social security number, they were all compromised.
Oh my goodness, that's a huge problem out there. Okay, Maduri says, is it independent doctors who outsource versus hospitals? Well, there are hospitals who outsource. That's not your main market. Our target is the independent doctors that are out there, Maduri, because they're the ones who need the most help individually. Doesn't mean that you couldn't enroll a hospital. Some of them do outsource, but believe me, that's a much longer process than just talking with doctors, independent doctors. And there's thousands of them in any given area that's out there. Shiraz says, why would doctors using a billing company for years switch to us? Now, Shiraz, that's probably one of those questions that you should ask your business coach. There's many, many reasons. We're going through some of them today. That is some of the services that we have that you can offer, your competitors don't have. And so many doctors are switching from other billing companies to our licensees because of all these ancillary services that I've been showing you here on the slideshow. Let's see where we're at time-wise here, Dr. Vicki. 4:48. Okay. Well, then let's move on here to this next question. This one is number 9. Do doctors need to make the codes work for them in legal and ethical ways? Talk to us about all those codes. You have to memorize all those codes?
Codes are really hard. I remember when I was a resident, I was always so annoyed because the administrators would, they would always follow up on these codes. So, I personally wanted to protect myself. Okay, so what are some of the differences? Well, there are some really quick visits, there are sort of intermediate visits, and then there are those really complex visits. And the charges associated with them can be very, very different. So I, as a practitioner, would probably err on the side of undercoding. I never wanted to be audited, so I would undercode, and that kind of hurt myself. There are other people who overcode, and that may well be one of the triggers for audit, because how many of these 5+ complex patients can you really see in your community?
Right.
So you want to make sure that you're using the right code. These codes are changing all the time. Let's say, for example, that I had a patient with multiple problems. It was a diabetic who just had a heart attack and needed an emergency appendectomy. Well, there are ways of coding that so that you can optimize your revenue while, not triggering suspicion. And I mean, that's kind of an art. And so having somebody who's an expert in that, that's really helpful.
Yeah, and we have a service called CodeRide. I have it on the screen there that basically can help you with that. We do have certified medical coders, by the way, that as partners will engage with you and the doctor if you need help on the code. So folks, you don't have to go to a coding school. You don't have to become a medical coder to be able to run this business that we're talking about here. By the way, I got a good question here about from Joan. She says, I have a question about how willing the doctors are to switch software and how easy it is to move over electronic records to your software. Joan, it depends on the doctor. It depends on the system that they have. If they can export their data to a certain format, that is, it's called HL7, Health Level 7. If they have the software that has the ability to do that, we can then import that data into our system. So again, I would talk to your business coach in detail about that, but the answer is that doctors want to switch if we can show them that there's economical advantages in doing that. Even though it might cost them something to move it over, they will do that if they can see the advantages that we have. That's one of the reasons that we do live demos of our system to doctors. We do, our staff, for you as our licensee, and that helps them to understand those differences. Okay, well, Dr. Vicki, I
Well,
wanted to, oh, go ahead. Sorry, yeah.
I was going to be a little contrarian on this. I hate change. I hate when I've got to upgrade my iPhone. I hate when I've got to get a new computer because I'm used to the old stuff. But
Yeah.
the thing is that if there's enough pain, it's a price I'm willing to pay because I know on the other side it's going to be better. And if you can just keep doctors focused on that other side, wouldn't it be great to increase your revenue, by 25%, be less hassled, have your practice be more enjoyable? That is something worth changing for.
Absolutely. Well, one last thing I wanted to mention, talking about how to market to doctors, we talked about your one book, the 10 Critical Questions for Physicians. I wanted to mention one other book that you have out on the market here, and here's a cover of it right here. This is called The New Thriving Medical Practice. Dr. Vicki and I wrote this together, and you'll be able to put your name on the front cover of this book as having written the foreword, which you can write a foreword if you wish, but we've already got one standard that you can use. And then your name is on the inside of the book as well here on the cover. And it's also inside at the end of the foreword, you have your contact information. That's all custom printed books for you exclusively for our licensees that Dr. Vicki has graciously licensed this book for use in marketing. By the way, in our classroom, we actually teach you how to go through and mark the book up so that a doctor doesn't have to read the whole thing. They just flip the little tabs there and see the highlighted passages there, and it really gets their attention. We've had licensees give out 2 or 3 copies of this and have a doctor call them up and say, I think I have some of the problems you point out in your book here. Can you come and give me that free practice analysis that you talk about? Okay, well, there's many other services that we have, folks. I'm just going to stick them off the screen here as I talk. But Dr. Vicki, I'm going to let you go. Thank you so much for being on here today. I know you're got to get to another call here at 5. So thanks again for being on here today and answering questions. Any parting words for everybody?
Yes. I mean, I'm a serial entrepreneur, and I know what I look for myself before I jump into something new. I definitely want to offer value. I want to see a path to profitability. I want to do something that somebody else has been successful in before. And I really think that this opportunity with ABS sort of, checked all of the check boxes that I'm interested in, including the integrity of the team you're joining. I think this is a wonderful opportunity. Again, I do not personally benefit from the success of the ABS licensees, but I've worked with them long enough to heartily endorse them. I mean, you may think that my comments are sort of a rah-rah cheerleader kind of thing, but these are all real comments. These are my real observations. I just think that this is a terrific business opportunity, and it's always my pleasure to support an ABS licensee. And one of my 10 laws of physician engagement is the most influential person in a doctor's life is another doctor. And, the fact that ABS licensees have, doctor-generated educational content is huge value that you're simply not going to find anywhere else. So I congratulate you for doing your due diligence on this opportunity. And I would just say, I think it's a great opportunity myself. So thank you, Patrick. I appreciate the opportunity to share some of these ideas.
Thanks again for being on here.